जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी। गोपी जान वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। यशोदनंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यशोदनंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यमुनतीरावनचारी। यमुनतीरावनचारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। यशोदनंदन व्रज जनरंजन। यमुनतीरावनचारी। यमुनतीरावनचारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे। हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. Hare Krishna and welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. Continue in the fourth canto, chapter 24, titled, still the song, chanting the song sung by Lord Shiva. We are text 73. Te vayam nodita sarve pracha sarge pracheshvaraha anena dvasta tamasaha sisrikshmo vividha prachaha tevayam nodidha sarve tevayam nodidha sarve pracha sarge pracheshvaraha pracha sarge pracheshvaraha anena dvasta tamasa anena dvasta tamasa sisrikshmo vividha pracha sisrikshmo vividha pracha tevayam nodita sarve pracha sarge pracheshvaraha anena dvasta tamasa sisrikshmo vividha pracha tevayam nodita sarve pracha sarge pracheshvaraha anena dvasta tamasa sisrikshmo vividha pracha tevayam nodita sarve pracha sarge pracheshvaraha anena dvasta tamasa sisrikshmo vividha pracha tevayam nodita sarve pracha sarge pracheshvaraha anena dvasta tamasa sisrikshmo vividha pracha te. By him vayam, all of us, noditaha, ordered, sarve, all, pracha sarge, at the time of creating population, pracha ishvaraha, the controllers of all living entities, anena, by this, dvasta tamasaha, being freed from all kinds of ignorance, sisrikshma, we created, vividha, various kinds of, prajaha, living entities. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. When all the Prajapatis were ordered to create by Lord Brahma, we chanted these prayers in praise of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and became completely free from all ignorance. Thus we were able to create different types of living entities. Purport. In this verse we can understand that the various types of living entities were created simultaneously at the very beginning of the creation. The nonsensical Darwinian theory of evolution is not applicable here. It is not that intelligent human beings did not exist millions of years ago. On the contrary, it is understood that the most intelligent creature, Lord Brahma, was first created. Then Lord Brahma created other saintly sages like Marichi, Bhrigu, Atreya, Vasishta, and Lord Shiva. They in their turn created different types of bodies according to karma. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Kapiladev told his mother that the living entity gets a particular type of body in accordance with his work, and that this body is decided upon by higher authorities. The higher authorities, as appointed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are Lord Brahma and all other Prajapatis and Manus. Thus, from the beginning of creation, it can be seen that the first creature is the most intelligent. It is not that some so-called modern intelligence has developed by the gradual process of evolution. As stated in Brahma Vaivarta Purana, there is a gradual evolutionary process, but it is not the body that is evolving. All the bodily forms are already there. It is the spiritual entity, our spiritual spark, within the body that is being promoted by the laws of nature under the supervision of superior authority. We can understand from this verse that from the very beginning of creation, different varieties of living entities were existing. It is not that some of them have become extinct. Everything is there. It is due to our lack of knowledge that we cannot see things in their proper perspective. In this verse, the word dvasta tamasaha is very important, for without being free of ignorance, one cannot control the creation of different types of living entities. As stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 3.31.1, Deva Netrina, bodies are awarded under the supervision of superior powers. How can these superior powers control the evolutionary process of the living entity if they are not free from all imperfection? The followers of the Vedic instructions cannot accept the Darwinian theory of evolution, for it is marred by imperfect knowledge. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayan Dadati Swabharantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vagishayasya vadhane, Lakshmiryasya chavakshasi, Yasyaste hridaye samvit, Tam narasimham aham bhaje, Pralada hridayaladam, Bhaktavityavidaram, Sharatinduruchim vande, Parindravandanam Harim. Chant the Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I forgot. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So I read the verse once more. When all the Prajapatis were ordered to create by Lord Brahma, we chanted these prayers in praise of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and became completely free from all ignorance. Thus we were able to create different types of living entities. So the verse itself, or better the purport, is stating, quite a few arguments in regards to how creation takes place, and it's in defiance of the Darwinian theory of evolution. And I would like to talk a bit about this particular theory, about natural science as far as I understand it, and relate also to creation reports as we find them in the Srimad Bhagavatam and so on. So Srila Prabhupada opens the purport by saying in this verse, we can understand that the various types of living entities were created simultaneously at the very beginning of the creation. The nonsensical Darwinian theory of evolution is not applicable here. So, as we are mostly familiar, there are two very contrary views on how did the world came into existence, or in particular the species. And also nowadays, this debate is ongoing, although there are very strong arguments for the side of the so-called creationists. You know, mainly people think of creationists when they hear of people of a Christian background or people with the background of some Abrahamic religion, you know, based on the Bible. And usually the issue people have with God in the first place is usually the God found in the Abrahamic religions, the Bible God, so to speak. Although there are different types of God concepts, as we see here in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna is very different from the God in the Bible, for example. But in his aspect of a creator, well, of course we can make connection because God is the creator. A bit, there are like also books written by, or like devotees. Many are familiar maybe with this one, Rethinking Darwin. I mean, there are at least people in there that are theist or of a theistic mindset, proponents of the so-called intelligent design theory, and very known is Stephen Myers. He's like very on the foreground, so to say, preaching. I think he's a great debater, and I really appreciate his way of how he is leading debates, how he brings arguments. And they have this Recovery Institute, and there are also people like Michael Behe. He's a biochemist. He came up with his concept of irreducible complexity. We will shortly go into that. And then there's Darwin, on the other hand, with this approach that so-called evolution theory, that life evolved gradually from very simple molecules and so on. They gradually developed into complex forms of life. So, of course, the theory always had issues, problems, and even if questions were answered, there were new questions coming up with it. And Darwin was not like an atheist by upbringing. He actually was a strong believer in the first place. He was a believer in the Bible and God. But then certain observations of nature brought him on a different track. His famous travels in the Galapagos Islands and so on, where he observed all kinds of life forms, and also his own occupation, so to speak. He was a breeder of pigeons, so he observed changes, how things can change by combining, how you say, when you breed certain animals. So you can, of course, you can conclude, traits can be, no, I forgot the term, vererbt, how you say? Yeah, inherited, or passed on by so he had this idea and developed gradually his own concept how the life forms came into existence. And also at his time there, he himself had doubts, there are statements in his biography and so on where he points out, if someone brings in strong arguments, I think it was in regards also to transition periods, then my theory crushes. So he was aware that his knowledge was actually not perfect. He had an idea, he had a certain theory, although it must perhaps say often was hypothesis. There's a difference between hypothesis and theory. Usually the understanding is hypothesis is kind of an educated guess at best, that you assume, you guess something. For example, someone if you leaves the room and does something, I can guess what's happening there. So, but it can be true, cannot be true, whatever. So I can have all kinds of guesses. There are also people nowadays with the flat earth theory. There are all kinds of, there's a lot of guessing going on. What could be there, what could be why, and so on. And the theory is more grounded, has more information, is more solid. It explains more. It is more of a informed approach. And usually when we speak in the science, as far as I understand, the theory must be a bit more grounded in facts and so on, whereas hypothesis can be randomly, you can guess all kinds of things. And actually we must accurately say, we must also say evolution theory. It's not evolution fact necessarily. And also the Darwinian theory in its original place, it's not anymore, which is, many have scientists, like within the scientific community have rejected it a long time ago. And there's this thing called neo-Darwinism, right? Because Darwin himself had made some errors that were approached by, let me just shortly. Here's a quote from, it said here, why is there? Just a few years after the death of the mastermind, one of his hypotheses turned out to be irregular, that of hereditary acquired characteristics. So Darwinian theory says, if you develop certain traits, physically and mentally, they will be passed on, and therefore in this way kind of evolution also takes place, you know. But there's actually not really evidence for that. As the quote goes on, a blacksmith powerful biceps or domestic duck's wings weakened by disuse are not transmitted to their respective offspring. The German zoologist, like zoologe, whatever, I don't know how to pronounce that in English. August Weismann provided the proof with a rabbit, not rabbit, but I don't know, some words are strange to me. Experiment, he cut off the tails of mice, of a mouse, or like many mouse, and mated the animals. Rodents were always born with tails. And there may be other examples how it can be proven that actually it's not that you don't pass on everything you develop yourself in terms of traits, also personality traits, or like a mental, or certain abilities, they're not necessarily, you don't pass them on to the next generation. It could be that, of course, in your genetic material there's already something in that you can pass on. And it already back then, at the time of Darwin, there were also other personalities from the, Christian camp. There was one monk called Gregor Mendel, and they were scientists also. Monks had been, engaged himself in research. And he, for example, also, he was breeding flowers. And of course he combined different flowers, new kind of variations came out of it. And an interesting thing is what happened if he as a breeder would stop influencing that the plants, or the flowers, generation by generation, went actually back to their original form. So which is taken as proof that actually there's a fixed, already created form, which is supposed to be like that, and it doesn't just evolve further. And there's this biblical statement also, in the creation report, God created this one according to its kind. Alles nach seiner Art. So there's here we have also this concept, 8,400,000 species of life. Or here the purport also says everything is already created simultaneously and brought into existence. It's not that they, like Krishna, made everything on the way. That he says, while we create, maybe there was just one species, then maybe we have another, and then another. No, he said there's a set, of a premeditated set of species that will be brought into existence. And so therefore we do strongly disagree with the Darwinian theory. Also this neo-Darwinism has other issues, in terms of genetics, and there's a whole book which, if you're interested in that, to get more into this matter, because I think it's important to, if you would, let's say, intend to preach in some field like that with either science and whatever, to be informed about what's going on there, what are like concepts and so on. And the Stephen Myers, he wrote also a book, Darwin's Doubt, where he addresses a lot of issues also with Darwinism. It's about intelligent design and so on. And it's well written. It has really good also critiques, you know, with everything. So, so the subject matter is certainly very interesting and must also be properly understood. I'm myself not at home in natural sciences, so I like to be inform myself a bit and have some get into some reading, or I like to see good documentaries about it, but it's not that I work on a daily basis, so I'm not an biologist, for example. But this biochemist Michael Behe, for example, he came up with this concept of irreducible complexity, which also at the end hints to that like every species is actually has to be there already in its completeness, because otherwise it could not evolve gradually. Irreducible complexity means he figured it out while entering into microbiology, like the microcosm of the cell. It was not always available to scientists. They gradually, of course, figured out, oh, there's more, there's more. Ravindra Swarup Prabhu once, many years ago, because he's like an academic, he made a statement that what you find regularly also in natural sciences in terms of magazines, like statements, we used to think, but now we know. And this repeats over years. There's always like reformation. We think, we used to think, but now we know. Oh, here we were wrong, but now we know better. And the problem with it is, it's not a problem that you haven't been fully clear or haven't full knowledge. The problem is, it's usually sold as, that's how it is, that's the truth. Because science confirmed it, science says it. And science is made like as it would be a perfect tool, if it would be in itself perfect knowledge. And that's what Srila Prabhupada also always calls out as cheating. You don't have perfect knowledge, because then you wouldn't have, if it would be perfect knowledge, you wouldn't have to come up years later, I used to think, but now I know. If you truly know the fact, if it's a fact, if it's a truth, it won't change. But we know partial things of it, you know, and then, but usually it's also in schools, also in my training as therapist, we had just like some biology lessons and so on. And the teachers usually felt very convinced that's how it is. Completely disregarding all the issues and problems and like that go along with this whole theory. And that's the issue actually, to sell something as truth or perfect knowledge, which is not. And here, like Prabhupada opens the purport with rejecting Darwin's theory and ends the purport with that the followers of Vedic instructions cannot accept Darwinian theory of evolution. And I would like to read a short quote from this book where they argue about this. I didn't really explain it. Irreducible complexity means he gives an example that in a cell there are we have in each cell they're like, let's say, little robots, bio robots. We can say it like that. They're like from a boat. There's a whole engine that works. It has its parts, and you cannot have the engine with any part missing. It wouldn't work. You need to have all of them fully developed, fully functional at the same time. Right? You cannot say, oh yeah, first there's this part and then gradually evolve to another part, because this contradicts the whole principle of natural selection, which is a part of this whole Darwinian theory. Survival of the fittest. Only traits or like mutations, as they call it, that actually serve the survival, or like these things are being passed on. But something that has no use for that will be selected, or will be, how to say, cast out. So something that has, an engine that is not functional because some parts are still missing, won't survive, so to speak. And in the cell, there's also little robots which have certain parts. He compares it to a mouse trap. Like also all the parts have to be there at the same time. And he says also these little machines, it would be completely not plausible, it wouldn't make sense to assume that they develop gradually, because by the whole framework of the theory or hypothesis, however we want to call it, these little things, this intermediate states, they wouldn't survive. That was always an issue with evolutionary theory, and it remains like that. How do you explain, or like how can some part gradually develop into another? In the intermediate states are the problem, because they're not just suddenly, like you have one form then the other. And in the beginning there was also the issue, or is still, that there are no transition fossils, for example. We have this form, it was always clearly this species, and then the other finding was this species. But what was the thing in between, if you assume they gradually evolved? So that was always an issue. So within the scientific community, you don't even have to be a believer in God. Among scientists, paleontologists, I think they're called, these people who research that, there's debate going on since always. So it's not an well-established truth. It's a theory with a lot of issues. But people have faith in it, but they don't want to admit that it's faith. They think, no, it's science. But it's faith. You have certain assumptions, you have certain facts, but interpretation of facts is based on a certain worldview, a certain ideology, perhaps, and therefore it's a type of faith. Because it's not beyond a doubt like an irrefutable truth. It's interpretation. And how can you even... Some things are really interesting. Sometimes the scientists, people, or like atheistic people, make people of faith look like, well, yeah, these people have a blooming imagination, the kind of things they believe, for God, and they're angels. At the same time, they have no problem believing the idea, for example, the giraffe, with this really long neck. I find it really so funny. I would feel embarrassed to actually say that. But they say, well, these animals, they don't always had their long necks, right? It evolved. Why? Because there were some leaves up there, and they had a desire, or maybe need. Usually desire alone would not be sufficient. If desire would be the driving force of evolution, I don't know where we would go, with all these desires. But even if it would be necessary, there would also be a problem, because what they do in between until they grow their necks long enough to get these leaves would start. But even the whole purpose, the whole idea that gradually then the neck got longer because they want to, over generations. One generation had the idea, we want to eat these leaves. And it is passed on to the next generation, and they, yes, let's like, oh, next. I mean, anyway, not consciously. But it's ridiculous. And these people are serious about it. Some people are really serious about such kinds of ideas. And then we believe in God like, blooming imagination. And there are other thoughts, other examples. If you think about that critically, it's at best funny, but actually it's kind of sad also. So actually the nature actually proves something else. According to my limited understanding, each species, each animal is already equipped to get what it needs in nature. That would, the same as you would say certain animals that rely on their sense of smell for hunting or finding food, they before didn't have that. They first had to evolve their noses until they could find their food, really. What do they do in between? And what's the point of that? Why would you first have to evolve something what you're supposed to be? It doesn't make sense. You would die if you're not equipped for finding your food as an animal like this. So these are some really serious problems with this whole kind of mindset, with the whole idea. And here he quotes like Stephen Meyer. He quotes another scientist, and that was the problem as Frazetta, that's the name of this scientist, understood it. Any system that depends for its function on the coordinated action of many parts could not be changed gradually without losing function. It's simple. But in the neo-Darwinian scheme of things, natural selection acts to preserve only functional advantages. Changes that result in death or reduced function will not be preserved. That's the theory, right? The integrated complexity of many biological systems thus imposes limitations on the evolutionary process, limitations that human engineers do not face when they design complex integrated systems. In 1975, Frazetta wrote a minor classic entitled Complex Adaptations in Evolving Populations. Explaining this concern, he wrote, "When modifying the design of a machine, an engineer is not bound by the need to maintain a real continuity between the first machine and the modification." So if you have a machine, it's not life doesn't depend on it. So you can in between, you can develop some stages and so on, but it's not like in evolutionary theory, the changes must serve to your survival, to your adaptation. So you're free to kind of switch it on, off, and it doesn't matter, so to speak. But an evolution transitions from one type to the next presumably involve a greater continuity by means of a vast number of intermediate types. Not only must the end product, the final machine, be feasible, but so must be all the intermediates. So that's the interesting thing. In evolution, if you gradually would, like let's call the monkey where we're supposed to have evolved from as humans, the intermediate forms must also be in itself functional. They cannot be kind of semi-functional or, because that would fail the purpose of adaptation. The evolutionary problem is, in a real sense, the gradual improvement of a machine while it's running. And I find it's very put very nicely. That's one of the issues. How can you change a machine while it's running, right? So, but yeah. So there are many issues with the whole thing, and there, is a lot of science going on. Also, science done by people with a theistic worldview. It's not that scientists are like intrinsically atheist. That's also would be a misconception. And also Michael Myers, he wrote also a book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, and there he actually examines the origins of natural sciences, and they indeed can be traced back to Judeo-Christian roots. Essentially, he points out that science first was to reveal the glories of God. Because also if you think of it, this is also part of realization theory, the mind always looks for things in nature he has already in itself, like certain ideas, concepts, we project them and then we try to find them, if I have an assumption or an hypothesis. And he says the idea that there's order in nature, for example, comes already also from the idea like that there is in the Bible, God created this and this and that according to a plan with a purpose. And scientists back then, or like the Christians, though we couldn't call them Christians, but like the Jews and like whatever the people before Christianity was also there, they also tried to see God in nature, how its workings are. And he gives, in one of his speeches, he gives a good metaphor. He says there are two books, because one of these earlier scientists said nature is like a book and you got to know how to read it. And he said there's one the scripture, like the revealed scriptures, what is to read, and the other is nature is also a book of God, so to speak, but there you need to learn a different language, which could be science, to figure out like God's workings within this world. So it was not separate, like this came later, also particularly with the idea of Darwin, so where the more also by historians or like whoever is responsible for this impression, as if religion and science would be always already opponents. But that's not the fact, it's not the history. It became at some point, also now, back in the last decades, where people write books like The God Delusion and so on. What was his name? Dawkins, and so the Vedic version is different and also applies science. If you read Srimad Bhagavatam and so on, like the whole, he also Sri Kapiladev is mentioned in that purport. There's a systematic study of material nature and how it works and why there's in the 5th canto and so on, there's calculation of time, there's astronomy. So all these things are there. Also in the Vedic context, Ayurveda and so on. So it's not that we are simply believing something in contrast to knowing something. Actually, these things complement each other because, faith becomes stronger also through understanding, through knowledge. And as we spoke also on Sunday in the class, that conviction in a certain spiritual path goes along with having knowledge, having understanding, and being observant. And Srila Prabhupada indeed encourages everyone to become a scientist and philosopher. In the Sri Upanishad, in the 10th mantra, where it talks about that the cultivation of knowledge has a different result than the cultivation of ignorance, if it was that, he lists in a paraphrased way the items of knowledge stated in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And in the later parts, he says one should become a scientist and philosopher in search for the absolute truth, for perfect knowledge, not for materialistic kind of purposes. Because this is there. We also have hypotheses and develop theories in order to explain to ourselves why is the world functioning as it functions. And so, but here the Srimad Bhagavatam is at a point where it gives us the understanding creation took place with the, particular blueprint. Everything was there already up front. Like similar when you buy a house, you don't build a house, you don't start building and on the way you figure out how it might turn out, what it needs. You have to have the plan up front. And it's also described when Brahma is doing the creation of work, he comes to a point, first he needs to be enlightened. This is also one of these things pointed out in this verse, where Shiva tells, we chanted these prayers in praise of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and became completely free from all ignorance. And Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport at the end, he says in this verse, the word dvasta tamasaha is very important, for without being free of ignorance, one cannot control the creation of different types of living entities. So Brahma first became enlightened, and since he is in a direct connection, he came out of the body of Garbhodakasha Vishnu, because the lotus, coming from the navel of Garbhodakasha Vishnu, is considered Vishnu's body, actually. So Brahma manifested directly from Vishnu's body. And within this Garbhodakasha Vishnu, the subtle creation, the subtle form of creation was already present. All the planets were there, all the living entities were there, all the species. And then Brahma could access this through also the lotus stem and manifest first the planets, from taking them, so to say, out of Vishnu's body, and then also the different species. He was empowered to manifest them. So they were all there, and evolution, as Srila Prabhupada points out, in our sense means that consciousness can evolve. It can also, would you say devolve when you say the opposite? In German you have devolution also, right? Yeah, so going up and down, so we can develop to a higher stage. We can also go, consciousness can be covered, then we are influenced by the modes of nature. And that this is a type of evolutionary process where it's said the living entity has to go through the cycles of the species until it arrives at a human form of life, and from there it can exit the cycle of birth and death. Yes, but all the species are there simultaneously, and the Prajapatis are empowered to manifest them. And there are also descriptions how some Prajapatis are capable to do that by assuming these forms. We sometimes hear also of great mystics or yogis, they take form of deers or other animals to enjoy sex life. I don't know why. It's something is described there, because sometimes there are comments. You might wonder, why do these rishis and sages do that? I don't know, but they just use different types of forms of body. But the Prajapatis also, they can populate through that, because they're beings with mystic abilities, so they can assume, let's say, animal forms, male and female, and then they create progeny, and in this way populate. It's interesting. Right? That's a description also to be found in Bhagavatam. Don't ask me for the exact quote, I would have to look it up again. But this is one of the explanations how this happens. So it's not by gradual cellular like evolution or molecular evolution of things. And also an argument that poses also a problem in Darwinian theory, if we have a concept of natural selection. So we have something, or we must assume someone who selects. Based on what? So scientists like to think blind mechanisms, which just like, how to say, puts the problem one step ahead, puts it on a different platform. You still don't explain why. So it still remains an issue, so if there's a selection, there must be a consciousness behind it that chooses based on a certain criteria. And this also there, usually people are satisfied with, again, some funny ideas like a blind watchmaker. That's a famous kind of thing, metaphor. One scientist once came up with this. If there is some God, then at best it would be something like a blind watchmaker. Have you ever experienced any blind watchmaker? Is that even a reality in this world? Right. So it's just like we see. It's not really about logic, facts, and truth. It's about ideology. It cannot be true what I don't want to be true. Right. This can also go the other way around. We have our faith, and then in science they might figure out something which is really true, but I'm not willing to accept it, and I will use whatever I find to just defy. No, it cannot be true because I don't want to have it, or I don't want it to be true. So therefore, the quality of truthfulness is important. That we see truth and acknowledge truth wherever we find it. Also not just in our own religious text, also in other religious texts, but also in science. If something is true, it's true, if it can be proven. That should be the attitude of a genuine spiritualist as well, right? And that's important because in debates, I saw quite a few debates also with this Stephen Meyer, another scientist, and I really very much appreciated his way, also his character. He's very respectful all the time. He sticks to the points, he brings arguments, he is on basis of facts. And the others, sometimes, I wonder what's wrong with these people. Really, the way how they attack, and how they appear at times even really, one must say, vicious, because they have this grudge, this intense hate towards this concept of God. And even if they apparently say, we argue science, there's nothing scientific in terms of arguments. It's just like they state their opinion, and it's supposed to be science. Whereas he argues quite differentiated and clearly based on, logic and arguments, as we learn it also. So that is important, that one is also checks oneself. How truthful am I? Where do I come from when I'm in an argument, in a debate? Am I really a truth seeker, or do I clinch to some ideology that works for me? That's very important. There's also part of humility, that I can acknowledge, oh, here I'm actually wrong, or here I don't know things, instead of no. So there's kind of a, how to say, let's call it conspiracy of many in the scientific community. We accept just any explanation, but it's clear from the beginning God is none of them. This is the only explanation we don't accept, is that there's a God. And it's kind of in a how to say, I don't find words today. they look kind of down on, if God is being brought up, it's kind of always the God of the gaps. So you don't have any other explanation, so you bring up God, rejected. As if that would be per se an argument that doesn't count. Or like a kind of intelligence that's behind things. So here it's important. One thing are the facts, scientific method, and so on. The other thing is character. And that therefore also in the Vedic tradition, it's secondary whether you get the information, the knowledge, the logic. In the first place, you're supposed to develop a character that has qualities like truthfulness and humility. Because otherwise you cannot attain real knowledge. Because you're in your own way. You're not impartial, you're not objective if you don't have these qualities. And this must be understood. Actually, in the first place, knowledge is connected to character, not to intellectual ability, it's character. Hare Krishna. So is there any more of perhaps comment or remark, question?
Yeah. So there must be a motivation that scientists do not want to believe there is a creator. And the motivation behind is clear, you know. If they become angry, if somebody wants to defeat them, it means that this is her false ego and say, no, exactly, something is wrong, but they cannot admit it. Because their motivation is not pure.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, the motivation matters a lot. Yeah, what drives me, and ideology is very, very dangerous. Not just like as there are religious fanatics, there are atheistic fanatics, scientific fanatics, even among their own community. Like really scientists who oppose the established doctrine of natural science, and these people they're banned. They're like kind of persecuted. There are horrible stories about like how there's a lot of how to say fanaticism going on also within scientific communities.
In my garden, I have primula. You know primula, this flower.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy it now everywhere. They are blue and red and yellow. Now it's time for them. But when you buy them, they have seeds, and next year they come again, but never the same color. They always become light yellow. Mm. Never blue, never red. I have this experience in 40 years in my garden. It's not possible. That means they go back to the original. How they make red ones and blue ones, I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you. One thing that I find interesting is just that how much we are influenced by, our upbringing, and so much steeped into these beliefs, also into this faith in science, and it's somehow very hard to get it out of us, or at least speaking of myself. So how do we do that, or what is practical?
I mean, I think what Stephen Myers also does is just be open to be wrong. That's all. It's very simple actually, because I think the hard issue is if people don't want to admit certain things, they're not open that maybe this what I defy so much could be true, and the consequence of it. If there's a God, oh my God, what does that mean? But also just differentiation, being willing to to accept challenges in terms of intellectually or scientific. I think it's the ability to be able to be wrong. Mm-hmm.
So in preaching also, that's what
yeah.
help people.
Yeah. Because it's mere arrogance if you stick to what I think I know, that's how it is, and no way it's otherwise. We are limited, So Sri Upanishad in the beginning, Srila Prabhupada opens the introduction is like from a lecture he gave, and he opens up the topic of knowledge, Vedic wisdom, shortly, and then immediately he goes to the 4 defects of the conditioned soul, saying, because it's important, what can I know, to establish that. And see, we have defect. Like Darwin himself had they have to always reform, or like how to say, revisit a theory and correct it. As Ravindra Prabhu, sorry, today is not my. Ravindra Swarup Prabhu said, like, we used to think, but now we know. It's some reoccurring phenomena in this regards. It's not that we have to reject science as something evil. Just look at it, differentiate it, and saying, of course, it explains things, and it's valid in our daily lives. There's so many things we rely on based on science, you know. But when it comes to the existential questions, the actual why, science does not provide the answers. The empiric science, we must say. Is this satisfying your question? Do we have another question?
Regarding Srishti Lila? From the point onwards where Lord Brahma manifested from the navel of Lord Vishnu, I'm not talking about Pradhan and previous steps, but from that point onward, is it correct that our understanding of creation, the Vedic version, is that Lord Brahma got empowerment and created mental sons in a form of Prajapatis? Was it like that? And then these Prajapatis, they created all these varieties of species.
Mm-hmm.
Was it through mental sons?
Well, yeah, it's described since Brahma's body is buddhi, or like pure intelligence, or at least very subtle. And out of his body he manifests all those Prajapati. In the first place there's Swayambhuva Manu, and also his wife. And it said they came out of the body of Brahma. And first there was not a... That's an interesting description. They were not. It was not to be ascertained, like the relationship of parent and son, because the whole gender thing wasn't there. Therefore, they're also called Swayambhu, is also self-born. I have to look it up, but at least, yeah, it came out from Lord Brahma's body, and they were also, yeah, subtle beings with the ability to create species, or to manifest them.
Then the species, they all came simultaneously, or is it like in the Bible, one day this?
Well, there is certainly in the descriptions there is a, how to say, time span in which we see also the elements. There's an according to Kapila-Dev, an evolutionary process. First this, then this, then this. So I assume, of course, there's also a gradual way how they had been brought into existence, but in the subtle state they were simultaneously there. Just the time of them occurring, or like appearing, manifested, might have, you know, they've got first this one, then this one. Like first the Prajapati, and then this Prajapati manifested this form or that form. Quanta Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
Wasser ist flach, er hat schon so Wasser.